This is the point of the exercise. Why am I bringing up this story about Weimar Germany? Because I want people to start imagining that just because the price of gold doubled or almost doubled, it doesn't mean it can't double again. It doesn't mean it can go up tenfold. It doesn't mean it can go up a thousandfold. It can. It certainly can if the dollar is indeed collapsing. I'm not saying that this is exactly what we're seeing right now. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm just entertaining the possibility. You know what I mean? This hyperinflation, which happened in Germany, it's like the classic case because it's well documented. It's relatively in the modern era. It happened to an industrialized country. It happened to a Western nation. So it's not as though we can pretend that hyperinflation happens only in third world countries because we have this example of Germany. So, of course, as we recall, this hyperinflation took place right after World War One. So, how did it come to be? Well, during World War One, Germany suspended its gold standard. Like many other Western nations, Germany was on a gold standard. They had paper marks which circulated alongside gold marks. And before the war, they were, had a 1-to-1 ratio. And so that they can deficit spend during the war, they suspended that gold standard. And of course, they spent a lot of money because they chose, instead of raising taxes, they chose to fund the war through issuing debt. So the value of those paper marks should have dropped quite a lot. But what we've seen is that during the war, people hoarded the cash. People didn't spend the cash. So inflation was latent. It was as though hidden. And that kind of reminds me of what we've seen here between 2009 and let's say 2020. If you think about it, there was a lot of money printing taking place back then, but somehow it didn't flow into the commodity market. So we didn't feel the inflation. It was there, but it was hidden, it was latent. And, I'm afraid that after 2020, suddenly all that money is unleashed, it's starting to bid up the prices of commodities. So we're starting to feel the inflation.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that worries me the most is, we can talk about hyperinflation, and I guess we're almost talking about it like in a vacuum, but it is something that happened in the real world, and the consequences of that, if you look at the social strife in like Weimar Germany after the end of the First World War was insane, where you had,
Yes.
different, communist movements, armed, fighting in the streets with the Freikorps, and lots of social strife. Like things
Yes.
got extremely bad, and I that is what I'm mostly worried about. Uh, that this will happen, whether it's in the U.S. or another Western country, if not like the whole West kind of being triggered into it at one point.
Yes. As you said, in Germany, at the end of the war, they had a revolution, and the Kaiser was deposed. He abdicated his throne, and instead there was a new republic created. This is what we call the Weimar Republic, and it was led by the Social Democratic Party. And it didn't go quietly. You had at first an uprising by the communists. The communist faction tried to take over. Later, you had an attempted putsch by the extreme right. And a few years later, you had some political assassinations. There was, for instance, in 1922, the assassination of their foreign minister, Walter Rathenau was simply gunned down, on his way home by some right-wing extremists. Uh, Probably because he, negotiated some treaties with former enemies of Germany, but also probably also because he was a Jew.
Mm.
You know what could end up being similar with the current trade situation is that they were experiencing a rise in the cost of goods. Of course, there it was really dramatic, I think, compared to what we might see. Luckily, we can produce a lot of food here, number one food exporter in the world, and so that will probably insulate us to some degree. But a lot of our like convenience items are being produced overseas right now. And of course, they were printing a lot of money. And you know what's interesting is Warren Buffett has kind of been hoarding cash, and so it'll be interesting, if once he injects it in, if other investors have copied him, if they'll all decide to start buying whatever they're going to buy at that time, whatever they think is best. And we also get the double whammy of central banks around the world trying to offload their dollars. Who knows? We might experience some similarities. Hopefully, nothing like they experienced there.
But the reason they started all that money printing in Germany was because, according to the Treaty of Versailles, they were forced to pay reparations to the West, particularly to France and Belgium. And those were huge sums. I mean, like people don't appreciate what huge sums they were required to pay. All in all, they were asked to pay 132 billion gold marks. And that is the equivalent of, I calculated it, I couldn't believe it myself, 47,256 tons of gold.
Wow.
That's
Now,
insane.
yes, that's insane. Now, they didn't expect them to pay it all at once. It was supposed to be paid in installments of 2 billion gold marks per year, which is about 700 tons. So just imagine that your country was required to pay 700 tons of gold per year. And that is after a brutal war, which pretty much, decimated your population and destroyed your economy.
It's unimaginably brutal, the amount that they were being asked to pay back.
Now, what
Hmm.
they tried to do, because they had to pay gold, so in order to get that gold, they printed their paper currency. In order to purchase, for instance, foreign currency, which was backed by gold, for instance, dollars, so they could convert them to gold and pay those reparations. But it's not clear whether they realized what kind of an inflation it would generate within Germany.
Hmm.
So, in order to understand the situation back then, you really have to look at a chart of the price of gold back then, priced in paper marks. And you see that at first, one gold mark was traded for two paper marks. This is the latent inflation that I was talking about. The price of gold hasn't risen by much during the war. But between 1918 and 1919, you see the price of gold going up tenfold. And you would think that it's, this tremendous rise in the price of gold during just 2 years. And people may have been under the impression at the time that the price of gold was expensive and that perhaps they should sell the gold. And this impression was reinforced by the fact that in the beginning of 1920, the government, as though, stopped printing and raised interest rates in order to try to curb the inflation. And indeed, the price of gold fell, and it fell down to about 10 paper marks per one gold mark. So there was a time there which you could have had the impression that the price of gold was too high, it was too expensive. And the point of the exercise is
Yeah,
to show that it can be very misleading because soon after they went back to printing and after this correction the price of gold rose up and I think by the end of 1921 it already set a new high. It was 50 marks.
and it would be easy to make that mistake, especially when it dropped back down. You might feel like, oh, maybe I should have sold it 2 weeks ago before it dropped back down to 10 paper marks. And
Hmm.
then before you know it, it goes surging up again, much higher. than it had been. And so, yeah, it's important to consider. It's hard to gauge these things when you're the one experiencing them.
Yeah, well, would also like to just point out, if we're comparing to the United States right now, like you said, we produce a lot of our own food. We have many buffers. We're not at that point yet. But I did want to point out that, like, Germany was already since the Reichsbank Act of 1875, where they were already on a fractional reserve system where I think it was a fixed percentage of 1/3 of the banknotes issued had to be backed in gold. So it almost seems to me like World War I and then the reparations and the workforce being decimated by the war, all of those stressors were almost like the system was almost already set up in a way where those stressors being put on it kind of like broke the system, which maybe if they weren't already on a fractional system, they would have weathered that enough where it didn't completely implode and then, lead to the rise of National Socialism in the end. And that I guess comes around to what I worry about. It's like, I don't think the United States is Germany in 1920, but like, I don't know, maybe we're Germany in like 1895 or something. Does that kind of make sense? Like something
Yeah.
could happen and then, we're already on that road.
I I see what you mean, and it's true. The United States is not in the same political situation, and perhaps trying to compare between the two is a bit of an exaggeration. And still, I think there's something in the mentality. Back then, the central bank, the German central bank, had no problem printing money. They saw that as a legitimate course of action in order to fund those reparations. And
Mm,
nowadays, we're seeing the Federal Reserve having no problem printing dollars in order to stimulate the economy. And I'm not comparing, the political circumstances, but I am comparing the mindset, as though
yeah.
the recklessness, the irresponsibility of the people in charge when it comes to managing the currency.
I absolutely agree with you there. Yeah, because yeah, I guess we can get into the minutia of like the exact political positions, but yeah, the underlying economic theory is very similar. It's basically like the same thought process where it's like, oh, we got to fix this. Let's print money very liberally for this, and the result seems historically to be bad.
So I just want to give you a few numbers about how things develop from that point on. In
Mm,
1922, the German government is having trouble paying those reparations again. Again, they continue printing. The price of gold surges to 1,800 paper marks by the end of the year. Now, just imagine, it's beginning to go vertical. I mean, like
That would
from
be a
50,
nightmare.
yeah. But that's just the beginning because the true mania, the true craziness happens in 1923. And that's, of course, associated with a few things that happened back then. In early 1923, because the German government is unable to pay those reparations, so the French and Belgian soldiers, they invade the Ruhr district, which was like
mm.
the center of German industry. They produced coal and steel there. All their coal mines and steel mills were located there. So it was like their industrial heartland. And they took over it so they could extract by force what they were not receiving, willingly from the German government. And the way the government responded, they said, okay, we're going to advocate passive resistance. So the workers at the Ruhr district, they went on strike. And the government, as though paid their salaries, and they did that, of course, through printing some more money. So this was like, you could say, the final blow to the paper mark. And then the price of gold goes absolutely, bananas. You see it rising to 1 million marks, then 10 million, then 100 million. then a billion, then 10 billion, 100 billion, and eventually it reaches all the way to 1 trillion paper marks by the end of 1923. So you have this hyperinflation taking place. It's very, very rapid. It happens within the span of 1 year. And just imagine, I mean, like, even if you sold your gold for 1 billion marks, yeah, you bought it at 1 mark. You sold it for 1 billion marks per one gold mark. You're under the impression that you made a killing, but in fact, you lost everything because within a few months, it's going to be 1 trillion. So you
Right,
already lost
absolutely.
99.9 or whatever of your money.
Mhm.
It is just hard to comprehend that it could move along that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the equivalent, if my like rough math is about right, it'd be like $38 trillion per troy ounce, US
Something
dollars in
crazy like
today's
that.
money.
Yes, yes,
It
Yes.
would be absolutely insane. The money would be obviously like worthless at that point,
yes.
like the fiat. Yeah.
When
Yeah,
you
it's
see
like
such a
nothing.
thing, it's not happening because gold is more valuable. It's because the currency is collapsing. And you get these
Mhm.
absurd numbers. Now, people are not equipped to even, comprehend such numbers. I mean, if you were following the price of gold in recent year here, you expected it to be somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. Okay, it went above 2,000. Okay, 2,100, 2,200. Suddenly, we've recently reached 3,500. And it happened very rapidly. I mean, like people are scratching their heads. But what if this is just the beginning? This is the point of the exercise. Why am I bringing up this story about Weimar Germany? Because I want people to start imagining that just because the price of gold doubled or almost doubled, it doesn't mean it can't double again. It doesn't mean it can go up tenfold. It doesn't mean it can go up 1,000-fold. It can. It certainly can if the dollar is indeed collapsing. I'm not saying that this is exactly what we're seeing right now. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm just entertaining the possibility. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and so in these situations, it can be hard to imagine, but what the best thing to do would be is just hold on, just dig your nails in and hold on to all of your precious metals for as long as you possibly can. And, hopefully until the point that it seems like there's going to be some sort of monetary reset, that this fiat system that you're currently enduring is going to get replaced with something else.
Yes, right. And I'm going to get to the aftermath in a second. I just want to say that really in that year, in 1923, you saw that those absurd scenes like children playing with stacks of banknotes and people burning them at the fireplace for heat because they were cheaper than firewood. And people, with wheelbarrows of cash in order to buy the most essential items. And for the population, such a thing is that's incredible suffering because people can lose all their savings almost overnight. And people who don't have the experience of a hyperinflation, they have difficulty imagining such a thing. That the currency which they worked so hard to acquire, all their life suddenly loses all value. So I think that's something we should be aware of because at least as far as the people in charge are behaving, they're behaving as though the currency is worthless. So why shouldn't we?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
No, exactly. And that's kind of my mindset on fiat currency. I don't I have some of it, I need to have some of it, but other than that, I keep actual commodities or other items, of real value because even if you look at between like I think what November and December of 1923, it was already crazy, but then it's like if you look at it on like a non-logarithmic graph, like the line goes like straight up. It's just insane. And then the
Even on a
social upheaval.
logarithmic chart, it goes up in a straight line.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just an insane the fact that it happens so quickly, and I don't think like you said, like a population can't really, most people can't really imagine like what that would look like. And the fact that people won't really, if that does happen, people won't really have the time, like the luxury if they haven't thought about it before. They kind of have to deal with it immediately because it happens in, 3 weeks or whatever.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So we were talking about the aftermath, and okay, at the end of 1923, the head of the German central bank, Rudi Havenstein, he dies. Well, and lucky for for the German government because his replacement issues new currency. He stops the printing, and he issues a new currency called the Rentenmark, which is convertible to the old currency at the rate of 1 Rentenmark for 1 trillion paper
Hmm.
marks. So, and the currency is supposedly backed by real estates, which the government owns and leases out to people. I don't know if that's really a good way of backing a currency, but they had no goal to back the currency with. But the thing is that just by stopping the printing, just because that Rentenmark wasn't printed to the same degree, it was stable compared to the old currency. So they managed to stabilize the economy. And this is like the lesson from that hyperinflation that you can't just look at the price of gold or silver and say, oh, they're expensive, I'm going to sell some. Because you never know if they're not going to get even more expensive next month. You have to ask yourself if something fundamental has changed, if the currency was reset, and if the new currency is proving to be more stable than the old one, then perhaps you can consider converting some of your gold and silver into other tangible assets. People say that back then you could purchase an entire city block in downtown Berlin for 25 ounces of gold.
That's amazing. So just
That's
hang in there and you can be like a king,
Yes, of course. Whoever had the goal to do that and the good timing could really make a
right?
killing. But it was difficult to do. I'm not pretending otherwise. It was difficult to hold on to your gold and silver during that hyperinflation. It was difficult also to understand when it was over and when it was the best time to deploy that capital once the currency and the economy stabilized.
Yeah, and there's also the issue. At the time you could deploy that capital in like on an individual level. Okay. However, once we get into the 30s and then the kind of government that comes into power, depending on who you are, that might just be taken from you and you get deported to like a death camp or whatnot. So that's kind of like the maybe I'm thinking about it too much, but it's like that's like my ultimate fear is this leading to such an upheaval in society that it allows for basically crazy things like that to happen, which it would actually allow for that. There could be a revolution or a large political movement or whatever that just takes over and completely flips the script on everything. And that kind of economic turmoil is what kind of opens the door for that to be very easily possible.
Yes. I think about it quite often, about the connection between these events. And the way I see it is that hyperinflation and the fact that so many people got absolutely decimated, I mean, like people were completely impoverished, I'm guessing that it created such anger, such, frustration that it looked for an outlet, and the outlet eventually was World War II. And probably without that hyperinflation, perhaps World War II would never happen. Thank you for listening to the Silver Hermit podcast. If you like this content, please donate in the link which appears in the description below. please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Remember, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This video is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be regarded as investment advice. Before taking any investment decision, please consult with a professional financial advisor who may assess your personal investment objectives and needs.